Welcome to Heaven Awaits. My name is Lee, and I narrate stories that change lives. From near-death experiences that offer a glimpse beyond the veil, to raw, personal testimonies of people who found God when all hope seemed lost. These are encounters with the divine, told from the heart. If these stories move you, please like, subscribe, and tap the bell. It's free, and it helps others discover the hope you found. Grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and join me for today's powerful journey. I never thought I'd be one of those people who completely falls apart. Growing up, I was always the responsible kid. Good grades, stayed out of trouble, went to college, got a decent job after graduation. I figured I had life pretty much handled, Like bad things happened to other people, but I was smart enough to avoid most problems. Man, was I wrong about that. My name is Tyler, and when I look back now, I can see all the warning signs were there way before everything went to hell. I was 28, working at this insurance company downtown doing claims processing. Not exactly my dream job, but it paid decent and came with benefits. The work was mind-numbing though. 8 hours a day in a gray cubicle, dealing with other people's accidents and disasters, typing the same information into forms over and over. I'd been with this girl, Vanessa, for about 2 years. She was in nursing school, working part-time at some coffee place to help pay for classes. We had this routine where I'd pick her up after her evening lectures, and we'd grab cheap dinner somewhere. Nothing fancy, but it felt like we were building towards something real. Everything changed when Dad got sick. My father had always been this tough guy who never complained about anything. Played football in high school, worked construction his whole life, never missed a day of work that I could remember. The type of man who fixed everything himself and told you to walk it off when you got hurt. So when he started getting tired all the time and losing weight, it took Mom months to convince him to see a doctor. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctor said maybe 6 months with treatment, 3 without it. I remember sitting in that hospital room listening to words like metastasized and palliative care, while Dad just nodded like the doctor was giving him directions to the grocery store. Mom was crying quietly in the corner, and I felt completely empty, like someone had reached into my chest and scooped out everything important. Dad lasted 4 months. 4 months of watching this strong man get smaller and weaker every single day. 4 months of driving 2 hours each way every weekend to see him. 4 months of pretending to be strong for Mom while watching my hero disappear piece by piece. When I came back to work after the funeral, everything felt different. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright. The constant phone ringing made my head pound. My coworkers kept giving me these sympathetic looks and asking how I was holding up, but I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that you feel like you're drowning in 3 feet of water? Vanessa tried to be supportive at first, but I could tell I was wearing her out. I'd zone out in the middle of conversations, stop responding to her texts for hours, cancel plans at the last minute because I couldn't force myself to leave my apartment. She'd try to talk to me about what was happening, and I'd just shut down completely. She told me one night that it felt like I wasn't even there anymore, that she knew I was hurting, but I wouldn't let her help me with any of it. She was right, but I didn't know how to let anyone help. I didn't even understand what kind of help I needed. Work became impossible pretty quickly. I'd sit at my desk staring at the computer screen, unable to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. I made dumb mistakes on simple claims, forgot to return important phone calls. My supervisor, Patricia, had always been decent to me, and she called me into her office after about a month of this. She said she knew I was going through a difficult time, but my performance had really gone downhill. Asked if there was anything the company could do to help me get back on track. I wanted to tell her that everything felt pointless, that I couldn't see the reason for processing insurance claims when people were just going to get sick and die anyway, that getting up in the morning felt like trying to lift a car, but instead, I told her I was fine and would do better. I didn't do better. 2 weeks later, she had to let me go. She tried to make it sound temporary, like I could take some unpaid leave to get myself together and then come back. We both knew that wasn't going to happen. Vanessa broke up with me 3 days after I lost my job. Not in a cruel way, but in that careful tone people use when they're trying not to hurt you worse than you're already hurt. She said she couldn't watch me disappear anymore, that she'd tried everything she could think of, but I wouldn't let her in, that she couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. The thing was, I did want to be saved. I just didn't know how to ask for help without admitting I was completely broken. After she left, I stopped pretending I was okay. I'd sleep until noon, then lay in bed scrolling through my phone for hours without really seeing anything. I ordered pizza and Chinese food because cooking felt impossible. I stopped showering regularly, stopped answering calls from mom, from my friends, from anybody who still cared enough to check on me. The worst part wasn't even the sadness exactly. It was feeling like I was watching my life from outside my body, like I was some observer watching this pathetic guy waste away in a studio apartment, and I couldn't do anything to stop it from happening. I lived in this apartment complex on the south side of town, nothing fancy but quiet, and the rent was reasonable enough that I could coast on my savings for a while. Most of my neighbors kept to themselves, which suited me fine back then. There was this older couple next door who argued loudly about TV shows. A single mom across the hall whose kid played video games way too loud. And then there was Demetrius. Demetrius lived right next to me, and I'd see him coming and going at all hours. He worked night shifts at the hospital as a security guard, so our schedules never really lined up. He was probably in his 50s, always dressed neat even when he was just taking out trash. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone with what sounded like his daughter, talking in this patient voice about homework or boyfriend drama. We'd nod at each other in the hallway, make small talk about the weather, or complain about the broken elevator, but nothing deep. He seemed like a good guy, just busy with his own life like everyone else. I'd been unemployed for about 3 months when I hit what I guess you'd call rock bottom. It was a Tuesday in October, and I'd been in bed for probably 14 hours straight. Not sleeping, but not really awake either. Just existing in this gray space where nothing mattered and everything felt heavy. I hadn't eaten anything real in 2 days. The apartment smelled like old takeout containers and dirty clothes. Mom had called 6 times over the past week, and I'd let every single call go to voicemail. I knew I should call her back, but what was I supposed to say? That I was fine? That I had everything under control? That's when the thought crept in, the one I'd been trying not to think for weeks. What if I just stopped trying? Not in some dramatic way like in the movies. Just stopped fighting so hard to keep going every day. Stopped pretending I was going to figure out how to fix everything that was wrong with my life. It wasn't that I wanted to die exactly. I just wanted the exhaustion to stop. The constant weight sitting on my chest. The feeling like I was failing at the basic task of being human. Maybe everyone would be better off without having to worry about me anymore. I was laying there thinking about this when someone knocked on my door. At first I thought about ignoring it. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I looked terrible. But whoever it was knocked again. Not aggressive, but persistent. It was Demetrius calling my name, asking if I was in there. I had no idea why he'd be knocking on my door at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, but something about his voice made me get up and answer. When I opened the door, he was standing there holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. He said his daughter had made way too much lasagna the night before, and he thought I might want some. I couldn't remember the last time someone had offered me homemade food. Hell, I couldn't remember the last time someone had thought about me enough to knock on my door. I thanked him and started to take the plate, but then he asked if he could come in for a minute. Said he wanted to check on me because he hadn't seen me around much lately. My apartment was a complete disaster. Dishes piled up in the sink, clothes everywhere, that stack of mail I'd been ignoring for weeks, scattered across the coffee table. But Demetrius didn't comment on any of it. He just sat down on my couch like it was the most natural thing in the world. He asked if I was doing all right, and said I looked like I'd been having a rough time. Something about the way he said it broke something loose inside me. Not pushy or nosy, just genuinely concerned. Like he actually cared about the answer. So I told him I wasn't doing all right at all. And then, for the first time in months, I started talking. About losing Dad, losing my job, Vanessa leaving. about feeling like I was drowning and not knowing how to ask for help, about the scary thought that had been in my head all afternoon. Demetrius listened without trying to fix anything or give me easy answers. He just nodded and made these little sounds that let me know he was really hearing what I was saying. He said that was a heavy load for anyone to carry by themselves, and no wonder I was struggling with all of it. Then he told me about his own dark period, years ago when his wife left him and took their daughter to live with her sister in another state. How he'd spent months barely functioning, drinking too much, calling in sick to work all the time. He said he'd been angry at God, angry at everyone really, felt like life had dealt him a terrible hand and there wasn't any point in trying anymore. I asked him what changed, what made things turn around. He smiled a little and said it was his neighbor, this old lady named Mrs. Washington, who lived downstairs from him. She started bringing him soup and wouldn't take no for an answer, would sit with him even when he was being difficult and mean, made him talk to someone at her church who understood what he was going through. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of a young woman in a graduation cap and gown. Beautiful smile, looked just like him around the eyes. He said that was his daughter Keisha, who'd graduated from college the year before and was working as a social worker now. If he'd given up back then, he would have missed watching her grow up, would have missed being proud of the woman she became. We sat there for a while longer, and then he asked if I'd eaten anything that day. When I admitted I hadn't, he went to my kitchen and heated up the lasagna in my microwave. It was the best thing I'd tasted in months. Before he left, he asked if I believed in God. I told him I used to, but I'd been pretty angry about everything that happened with Dad. Felt like if God was real, he wouldn't have let things get so bad. Demetrius nodded like he understood that completely. He said he'd felt the same way during his divorce, but eventually he realized that maybe God works through other people sometimes. That maybe Mrs. Washington showing up with soup when he needed it most wasn't just a coincidence. He said he'd been praying for me, which should have felt weird or pushy, but somehow didn't. He asked if it would be okay if he kept checking on me, and I said yes. Over the next few weeks, Demetrius became this lifeline without making it feel like charity. He'd text to see how I was doing, nothing overwhelming or annoying. Just simple stuff like asking if I wanted to walk to the grocery store with him, which got me out of my apartment and reminded me I wasn't completely invisible. He never preached at me, but he'd mention things naturally while we walked or sat on the building's front steps in the evenings. How prayer had helped him get through his divorce. How his church family had supported him when he lost his own father to a heart attack. How God had carried him through seasons when he couldn't carry himself. He said sometimes God uses other people to be his hands and feet in the world, and sometimes he uses circumstances we can't understand to draw us closer to him. I wanted to argue that God felt more absent than ever, that if he was real, he wouldn't have let everything fall apart like this. But something about Demetrius's quiet faith was different from the religion I'd grown up with. My family went to church when I was little, but it always felt like performance. Do this, don't do that, sit up straight, don't ask too many questions. Demetrius's faith seemed more like having a conversation with a friend than following a bunch of rules. The real turning point came about a month after that first day with the lasagna. I'd had a particularly brutal day. Job interview in the morning that went nowhere because I stumbled over basic questions and probably looked like I'd rather be anywhere else. Then another rejection email in the afternoon from a position I'd applied for weeks earlier. That familiar weight started settling back on my chest like a lead blanket. I was spiraling again, sitting on my floor leaning against the couch because even getting onto the couch felt like too much effort. That's when Demetrius texted, asking if I'd had a rough day and if I wanted some company. I don't know how he knew. Maybe he heard me pacing around or talking to myself, or maybe it was just good timing. But when he came over with a bag of cookies from the bakery down the street, instead of trying to cheer me up or give me advice, he just sat on the floor next to me. We sat there for maybe 30 minutes without saying much. He didn't try to fill the silence with small talk or tell me everything would work out fine. He just sat with me in it, which was exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know that's what I needed. Then he asked if it would be okay if he prayed for me out loud. Nobody had ever asked me that before. In my family, prayer was this private thing you did by yourself, before bed or meals. But something about the way he asked made me nod. Yes. I'd never had someone pray for me like that. Not formal like in church, but like he was talking to a friend about someone he cared about. He thanked God for bringing us together as neighbors. He asked for strength and hope for me during this difficult time. He prayed that I'd feel God's love in real ways, and that I'd know I wasn't alone, even when it felt like I was. I cried harder than I had since Dad's funeral. Not the angry tears I'd been holding back for months, but something deeper, like a dam breaking inside my chest. For the first time in forever, I felt held. Not fixed or cured, but held by something bigger than both of us. That night, after Demetrius left, I prayed for the first time since I was probably 12 years old. It wasn't eloquent or fancy like what I'd heard in church. I just sat there in my dark apartment and said out loud that if God was there, I needed help, that I couldn't do this alone anymore and didn't know what I was supposed to do next. The darkness didn't disappear overnight, because depression isn't that simple. You don't just pray once and suddenly everything's perfect. But something shifted that night, like a door opening just a crack, letting in the tiniest bit of light. I started going to church with Demetrius sometimes, not every Sunday, and not because I had everything figured out or because he pressured me to go. I was just curious about this community that had shaped such genuine kindness in him. The pastor was this woman named Reverend Thompson, who preached like she was having a conversation with friends instead of giving a lecture. She talked about God's grace like it was something real you could actually touch, not just some abstract concept. The people there were normal too. Not perfect church people pretending their lives were flawless, but regular folks dealing with regular problems. LaShonda worked 2 jobs and was raising 3 kids by herself. Robert had been sober for 8 years, but still went to AA meetings every week. Carmen's husband had left her for someone younger, and she was figuring out how to rebuild her life at 52. They welcomed me without asking a bunch of questions or expecting me to have my act together. I also started seeing a counselor around that time. She was this straightforward woman who didn't let me get away with deflecting or making jokes when things got uncomfortable. She helped me understand that depression wasn't a character flaw or something I could just think my way out of. It was a real medical condition that needed real treatment. She explained that my brain chemistry was off right now, and that wasn't my fault, but it was my responsibility to do something about it. Medicine might help. Therapy would definitely help, but I had to show up and do the work. So I started taking medication, sertraline, which made me feel weird and nauseous for the first couple weeks, but gradually started lifting some of the fog in my head. I began reaching out to friends I'd pushed away, starting with simple texts, apologizing for being MIA, and explaining I'd been going through some stuff, but was working on it. My friend Jerome was the first to respond. He said he'd been worried about me and asked if I wanted to grab lunch that weekend. Turns out most of my friends hadn't written me off completely. They'd just been giving me space because they didn't know how to help. Most importantly, I began to understand what Demetrius meant about God using people. Through my neighbor's consistent, quiet love, I experienced something I'd never connected with faith before. Grace. Not earning your way back to wholeness by being good enough or doing all the right things, but being loved and supported while you figure out how to heal. It wasn't always easy after that. There were still bad days when getting out of bed felt impossible. Days when the medication didn't seem to work and therapy felt pointless. But now I had people checking on me. Demetrius would still text randomly to see how I was doing. He would call me out when I started isolating again. The church folks would ask how I was and actually wait for a real answer. 6 months later, I got a job I actually wanted. Marketing coordinator for a nonprofit that helped homeless veterans. It wasn't glamorous or high-paying, but it felt meaningful in a way my old corporate job never had. A year after that, I started dating again. Not because my life was perfect, or because I thought another person would fix my problems, but because I'd learned I was worth fighting for, and I didn't have to fight alone. Her name was Zara, and she was patient with my bad days and celebrated the good ones. She'd been through her own struggles with anxiety after college, so she understood what it meant to have mental health issues without trying to fix me or getting frustrated when I couldn't just think positive thoughts. Demetrius still lives next door to me. We grab coffee most Sunday mornings after church now, and I've started volunteering with him at a local crisis hotline. It's heavy work, talking to people who are in the same dark place I was, but it's also the most important thing I've ever done. Because I've learned something about darkness. Sometimes the best way to keep it from pulling you back down is to reach out your hand to someone else who's struggling to climb up. When someone calls the hotline at 2 in the morning because they can't see any reason to keep going, I remember that Tuesday afternoon when Demetrius knocked on my door with a plate of lasagna. I remember what it felt like to have someone show up without any agenda except caring about whether I was okay. God didn't send a lightning bolt or perform some dramatic miracle to save me. He sent a neighbor who cared enough to knock on my door and remind me I mattered. He sent a therapist who wouldn't let me hide from the hard work of healing. He sent a church community that loved me before I had my life together. He sent medication that helped balance my brain chemistry so I could think clearly again. He sent friends who welcomed me back without holding grudges about how I disappeared. Sometimes salvation looks exactly that ordinary and exactly that profound. It's not one big moment of transformation, but 1,000 small moments of people choosing to love you when you can't love yourself. It's showing up even when you don't feel like it. It's accepting help even when your pride says you should handle everything alone. These days, I try to be for someone else what Demetrius was for me. Not perfect, not having all the answers, just present and willing to show up. Just willing to knock on the door and ask if everything's okay. Because sometimes that's all it takes to pull someone out of the darkness, showing up and refusing to let them disappear. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression, please let them know they are not alone, because they truly aren't. Anyway, let me know what everyone's thoughts are on this testimony. Until next video, stay safe and continue to be blessed.